Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Nilesthra Padayachee. I am a practicing attorney and women's rights activist, and it is my great honor to welcome each and every one of you here this evening to to engage in this very difficult but very important subject, the reporting of sexual violence and abuse. The room is filling up nicely. We are going to continue to admit people as we go along. But as has become customary at our webinars, we'd like to begin with a moment's silence just to remember all of those who are currently dealing with COVID, those who have lost their lives, as well as all of those who have experienced sexual violence and any form of gender-based violence. Please, can we have a moment's silence? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, can everybody hear? Can everybody hear quite well? Please let us know in the chat. Okay, right at the beginning, I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. As much as I am a practicing attorney, none of the advice given here this evening can be considered legal advice, as well as the advice that the other professionals may render. We are not rendering advice in our professional capacity per se, but you are welcome to engage with us privately hereafter, and we're very happy to try to help as best we can. Also, any matters that we discuss this evening are completely of our own views and opinions. They do not reflect the views and opinions of our employers or any organizations or institutions that we are affiliated with, unless specifically stated otherwise. So that being said, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Unfortunately, Mayuri Govender has sent her apologies due to unforeseen circumstances. She's unable to attend this evening, but we do have with us our keynote speaker, who is Nikita Ramkissoon. And so Nikita is a freelance journalist and educator who runs survivorvoices.co.za, a website for survivors of sexual violence to tell their stories safely and anonymously. She has her master's in gender studies and has been a part of various movements in the constant fight for gender equality. She is currently based in Sweden and, as far as I know, still has not learned a word of Swedish. And then we're also very happy to have with us Romita Hanuman-Pillay. When she's not cooking mutton curry, she is a journalist and communications practitioner at eThekwini Municipality. She's an abolitionist and human trafficking activist, leader of the Trafficking Hub movement in South Africa, animals rights activist, member of the Youth Unite South Africa, member of various anti-human trafficking organizations, including Exodus Cry International, World Without Exploration, and the National Freedom Network. Welcome, ladies. We are so happy to have you this evening.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you for having us.
And welcome to those of you who have joined after the initial introduction. So basically, the ethos behind these webinars is not purely, it's not an academic exercise. So it's not an exercise where us as experts or professionals come together to discuss our knowledge. That is not the point of this. The point of this is for us to have a down-to-earth discussion about topics that are very difficult to engage with, that are seen as taboo in our culture, and that people do not speak about openly or easily. So it's for us to have insight and knowledge into these subjects and to share perhaps each other's insight and wisdom of how to more easily engage in these topics and make other people comfortable engaging with them as well. It is only when we shed a light on abuse that, you know, we are going to be able to take steps to combat it. And sexual abuse in itself is something that is so difficult to discuss. Growing up in a conservative Hindu home myself, I turned 32 recently, and my parents still haven't had the conversation of birds and bees with me. So if sex is something that we don't speak about, we can only imagine how much more difficult it is to speak about rape or sexual assault or anything of that nature. And yet, one in every four women in South Africa will experience an instance of rape or sexual assault within her lifetime. So if it's not us, it's definitely someone we know. And it is for that reason, it is so important that each of us are familiar with how to, not only how to report rape, but what happens when somebody reports it to us, not in a professional capacity, but on a human level. What do we do in a situation where a friend, a family member, a neighbor, or a coworker comes to us and tells us of an experience of sexual assault? How do we engage with that person? It's very important that we learn the tools that are going to assist us in allowing that person to have a safe space in order to tell their story. And it is for that reason I am very grateful to have met and to have with us Nikita Ramkissoon, because her website, the work that she does, and just generally everything about her screams compassion on every level. And I'm going to hand over the reins to her to do the trigger warning and then go straight into her topics of discussion. Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you so much, Ness. I'm Nikita Ramkissoon. As Ness said, I have worked in the sphere of gender-based violence and sexual violence for as long as I can remember. And today's discussion is going to be very heavy. So it will trigger emotion and reaction from many people who have experienced sexual violence or know somebody who has experienced sexual violence. So if you are feeling uncomfortable with the conversation, you are welcome to log off or mute. But we do encourage you to be part of the conversation, even though it is quite difficult. Just know that as soon as you feel uncomfortable, you can also mention it in the chat, and one of us will respond to you in a timely fashion. So today, Mayuri was supposed to do the definition. So the important words and phrases that we should be aware of. In terms of South African legislation, rape is unlawful sexual intercourse or sexual activity with a person without consent. And girls under the age of 12 cannot consent, and between the ages of 12, girls and boys or any gender, and between the ages of 12 and 15, you can be the victim of statutory rape depending on circumstances. Unfortunately, South African legislation does not include men and boys under the blanket term of rape, sodomy, and indecent assault. And this is something that we are still fighting to get recognized. So, the South African Police Service has to help any victim of any sort of sexual violence, regardless of gender, even though this is quite a contentious issue regarding gender and regarding definitions. So that aside, let's begin with the actual reporting process. As a family member or as a friend, if somebody comes to you and trusts you enough with the information that they have been raped or sexually assaulted, the three important things that you need to do. 1, say, I believe you. You have to believe that person, because if you don't believe them, this adds to the stigma. Number 2 is, what can I do for you? And number 3 is, you are loved and it was not your fault. Those 3 things are the basis on which we can conduct ourselves with a survivor. And there's a reason that I say survivor. It's because I always refer to somebody who has lived through it as a survivor. Somebody who is a victim, I refer to them as somebody who has died as a result. And this can be contended in many different ways, but this is the way that I see it. So I always see somebody as a survivor, if they are still alive. So the South African Police Service is there to help, but unfortunately, the police are not very helpful in South Africa. So the first person, the first port of call, usually for somebody to admit that something has happened to them, is the closest person to them. I was lucky in that when I approached my family, it was years after the incident. I was lucky that my family believed me and they were so supportive. The first thing they did for me was to get me to counseling and ask me what I needed from them. And it was a long process. I am still in therapy even to this day. And that was the best way that they could support me. But you have to have a number of tools. And as a family member or a friend receiving this kind of information, you need to be emotionally prepared for it. So the first thing to do is, aside from telling them that I believe you, what can I do to help you, and it was not your fault and you are loved and supported, is also receiving the information in a way that does not undermine the survivor. The first thing you can do is just listen. Listen to the person. Don't judge. Just listen to what they experienced. Don't ask them for any detail. A survivor does not owe you anything, let alone their entire story, regardless of whether they've confided in you or not. So listening is key. Sometimes all a survivor wants to do is to get their story off their chest. And a lot of the time, people don't really want advice or you to fix whatever's happened. They just want you to listen. And once you have listened, ask that person, what do you need from me now? Do you want to go to the police? Do you want to tell your family? Do you want to confront your perpetrator, etc., etc.? But you need to have that discussion with that person. It can't be you trying to put the pieces together just of your own accord. You take your lead from the survivor themselves. And by taking that lead, it often involves you doing your own research as well. I will place a link in the chat now to an article that I wrote in 2017. And the article is called What People Don't Tell You About the Aftermath of Sexual Trauma. So this is for survivors and for people who the survivor has confided in. The first thing that a person would go through is nightmares. And the person will experience nightmares for months or even years afterwards. And the thing about nightmares and sometimes night terrors is that they cannot be controlled. So if you're living in a house with the survivor and they start screaming in the middle of the night, you need to work out with them how to control that situation. In some cases, survivors either depend on medication, drugs, or alcohol in order to sleep, which health professionals regard as unhealthy ways of dealing with trauma, but it's not up to you to judge that. What is up to you is to help that person work through it if they want your help. The second thing is decreased or increased sexual urges. And this is something that we can go into detail at a later stage, but it is quite interesting in how generally women who have been sexually assaulted or raped, people assume that they never want to experience sexual contact again because it's replaced with feelings of trauma, fear, pain, and anxiety. And while this is true for many, it's not always the case. Sometimes they will want more sexual contact, and sometimes from anybody in line of sight. And this is because regardless of how sexual interaction occurs, the body, which protects itself from sexual trauma in any way, be it self-lubricating or disassociating in some cases. The involuntary gaining of pleasure from even a violent sexual act, it's still an invasion, a crime, and a power-related show of dominance. And that's where the confusion emerges. So it is difficult to deal with that kind of thing as a friend or a family member. But if you notice that kind of behavior, dangerous sexual behavior emerging, this is something that you need to talk to them about as well. Mental illness almost always occurs after sexual violence. And depression is the most common thread found in survivors. And this includes loss of motivation, dropping out of university or school, quitting jobs, physical and mental disorders, eating disorders, etc. And usually medication is prescribed, but the urge not to take your meds is strong, and I've experienced this, and sometimes feels like it won't or just doesn't help. But survivors need to trust the experienced people when they say that it will help in the long run. And if somebody you know is on medication afterwards, you need to reassure them that this is going to help in the long run. Therapy also, it helps a lot. I mean, I've been on in therapy for years, and at some point it does feel unfair that you have to shell out for medical treatment while your perpetrator faces no ongoing consequences. But your life is in your hands still, and it may seem trivial, but bulimia, anorexia, binge eating, you may try to eat your feelings. As soon as you notice those kinds of change in behavior, it's also a discussion you may want to have with them. When a survivor is self-blaming, self-loathing, and self-pitying, it's a huge trigger for many people around them that, oh, they're making jokes about their self-image again. Sometimes looking in the mirror for a survivor may be a nightmare in itself, and they may feel dirty no matter how much they clean themselves. And developing things like OCD, you may feel ugly and want to just put on makeup every single day or dress up in a certain way, and it becomes a vicious cycle and it consumes the survivor. As a friend or a family member, the key is to nip that in the bud, constantly reassuring the survivor, no matter what they were wearing, how much they drank at the bar, who they spoke with, who they gave their number to, and who they invited for coffee to their house. Sexual assault is never, ever, ever their fault. Even if both people were naked and the condom was on and you had sexy lingerie on, if you say no, it means no. It is not the survivor's fault. And that is something that you need to repeat over and over again, maybe years after the incident. When that person starts having difficulty maintaining friendships and isolating themselves, it is the worst thing they can do in the long run. Some people may not understand and they may make light of the situation. When the person has the strength and vocabulary to trust you with that information, make sure that they know that you are part of their tribe and you want to be there for them. Make sure that you respect their boundaries and let them know that even though they have baggage, as everybody else does, you are prepared to take on that burden. Let them know that they also take on their friends and family's baggage and ease their pain whenever they can, and don't they think that you want to do the same for them. Yes, you can help in filtering out toxic people from their lives, or they have to realize it and do that themselves, but constantly let them know that you are there for them, even if they do push you away. Never, ever pity the person. Do not feel sorry for them. You don't need to be treat them with kid gloves, but you need patience and sensitivity. And in time, that person will be able to call people out on their pity. I took a long time to develop that. But if you pity that person, it's like you're looking down on them. And that adds to the stigma. People will say, if the person is public about this information, people are going to say that they asked for it. Some people won't believe them. And if they behave in any sort of way, it will be put down to, oh, she or he is like that. You'll get called many names. And if you press charges, the stigma is far worse. You'll be labeled many things by society, but the survivor doesn't owe anybody anything. And you as a friend or a family member needs to alleviate that stigma. Call out people when they talk about this person who has trusted you with this information. Be that person's safe space. If they have suicidal thoughts, this is something that is difficult to deal with. The thought process is irrational. You can't tell that person, oh, you're suicidal again, or you're just seeking attention. Suicidal thoughts and ideation, and sometimes even attempts, need to be treated with the utmost seriousness. It involves you having to call medical practitioners, calling an ambulance, or sometimes even calling their therapist. Work within that person's boundaries, and sometimes, just every now and then, you have to break those boundaries. But you need to assess the situation and realize what you need to do. So those are some of the key things that friends and families can do in that regard. And the person is not obliged to report to the police. And if that person chooses just to trust you with that information and not report it to the police, you need to respect that. They have their reasons. They don't owe you their reasons. And when they say that I want to go to the police and I want you beside me, you can tell them, I'm not prepared to go on this journey with you. And if you aren't, then don't go right to the door of the police station and then turn back. You are there for the long haul. And they need to know how far you are willing to go as a friend or a family member. Many people will judge someone who hasn't reported, saying, oh, you went through this, but you didn't report. Is it even real? Like, did this actually happen? What are you trying to gain from saying this to me? A lot of the time, a survivor just wants to talk. They don't want to go to the police because the police are hostile. They don't want to go into the court system because the court system is not necessarily in a survivor's favor. So as much as we want to put faith in our legal system, a lot of the time we can't. With my situation, there was no physical evidence. I was between the ages of 4 and 8 when this happened. And I can vaguely remember a lot of it, but there's only 1 or 2 instances that I can remember really clearly. And even though those incidences play in my mind whenever I'm feeling isolated or whenever I'm at my most depressed, I couldn't go to the police because there was no physical evidence. It was my word against his. And we realized, I sat down with my family and we spoke about it at length. And we decided as a family not to press charges because it would be a losing battle. Unfortunately, that is the case for most people. You can encourage somebody immediately after the fact to get a rape kit done and go to the police. Which brings me to the next point. Reporting to the authorities. As much as you are not obliged to, I believe that it should be done. If not for gaining closure and gaining justice, for the reporting purposes alone, for getting the numbers right at the very least. So a little quick detour is that in Sweden, the law was changed recently to include that every single sexual act done without consent is considered rape. So if a person doesn't voice consent right from the get-go, then it is considered rape. And every single case is a new case with a new case number. So if one person rapes the same person more than once, it is considered a new case. And this is part of the reason that the numbers are so high in Sweden, is because the reporting process means that every single case is taken as an individual case. And yes, Stockholm is seen as the rape capital of Europe, unfortunately. And living in Sweden for the past few months has taught me how different our police services are. But it is still very much dependent on social class and race as well. Unfortunately, if a white woman goes to the police and says she's been raped, it will make headlines. If a black woman from the township goes to the police and says that she's been raped, they might just send her home and say, just forget about it. One police officer actually told a friend of mine, oh, just think of it as a bad sexual experience. It is not a forgiving world that we live in. It is absolutely horrible in terms of sexual violence. And we need to know that it is about power. It's not about sex. And that is why I constantly say there's no such thing as consensual sex and non-consensual sex. It's sex and rape. And it is everything to do with power and who holds the power, who wields that power. And a lot of the time, the authorities are in favor of the people who wield the power. You are not required to have a rape kit done to go to the police. And you are not required to have a case number to get a rape kit done. You can do either in either order, and neither requires information from the other to get done. Netcare, even though it is a private health company, has a rape kit service that you don't need medical aid to go and get help and get a rape kit done. But the majority of rape kits in South Africa are done by Tutuzela centers. And sometimes they will send you from pillar to post. You have 72 hours, ideally 48, in which to get a rape kit done. A rape kit, and this is highly triggering, it is an invasive process. You have to have a doctor who is licensed to do a rape kit. You can request the gender of your doctor. You can request the religion of your doctor. You can request that a nurse be there or a nurse not be there. You can request that your partner or your friend stay in the room with you or they leave. Most of the time, they will be asked to leave. If you say that you want somebody there, you can have somebody there. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. Doing the rape kit, as much as it's invasive, it may seem completely irrelevant with the number of tests that they do. It's all absolutely necessary. You can ask for pictures to be taken as auxiliary evidence. And when you get a rape kit done, you are entitled by law to have a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and an AIDS counselor. You can request all three. Unfortunately, and this is some research that I did with MSF about 2 years ago, that only 24% of medical care centers have access to psychotherapy post-sexual violence. If you are if you do want to insist on psychotherapy after you do your rape kit, which you are completely entitled to, you have to make sure that you go to a place where it's actually available. Unfortunately, most public health services do not have this. If you're going to private healthcare, you can even request the doctor that you want or the psychologist that you want. You are entitled to call your therapist immediately, and they are required, even regardless of whatever time it is, they are required by law to show up at the hospital. And just know that post doing the rape kit, they will say that you are required to leave your clothes behind. You can tell them yes or no, whether you want them to take your clothes and have clothes brought to you, or you don't want to leave your clothes. I suggest that you do leave your clothes as evidence. And there always should be a place for you to shower after doing the kit. Reporting to the police is a little bit more difficult. The process is, you can call in and report over the phone, or you can go to a police station. Medical practitioners can call police for you to come to the hospital, especially if you are injured. So if you are reporting by telephone, you have to give all the information. You cannot leave any information out, and you need to be prepared to spell everything. Literally spell everything, not just spell out everything. You have to have your ID number ready, any descriptions that you took note of, names of roads, detailed descriptions of where you were. And you can lay a charge, the person can lay a charge at any time. There's no restriction in this regard anymore. And a victim cannot be turned away, and the investigation should proceed as normal, as any other investigation should proceed, regardless of time frame. In person, you can request an officer of any gender. You can go in and say, I need a trans person friendly officer. And if they fail to provide that to you, you can wait there until they can. You can report them for not being trans friendly. You can request a specific officer if you are familiar with that person. And they are by law required to take you into a private consulting room. They will take all the evidence necessary, and you need an investigating officer, fingerprint experts, a photographer or video unit, and a tracking or crime prevention unit. You are entitled to all of those things. Especially if the victim is a minor, a police official must remain with them until a person who is going to take the matter further arrives. And they are required to give the person water, anything to eat. Anything that the person reporting needs must be provided by the police officers. They need to have an accredited healthcare practitioner who will examine the person, and somebody to do an identikit. And the procedure that you need to follow is identify yourself, brief description, ask whether all the procedures have been followed. If they ask invasive questions, you can by all means say no to answering certain questions. And the police has to provide the survivor and their families with a written case number, all the personal details, and the contact details for the investigating officer. There needs to be complete transparency. And there needs to be, as far as possible, emotional support offered to the survivor at the police station and at the place where it happened if fingerprinting and evidence is being collected. Nobody is allowed to touch you. They say that touching the person unnecessarily must be avoided, and showing empathy and sympathy. If a person does not show you that kind of behavior, you can request a new investigating officer, and you can report the one who does step out of line. You need to know your rights when approaching the police station because of the stigma that is involved and the lack of training that police have in this area. And this is part of the reason that people don't report, is because there's the fear of not being believed or being accused of lying, shame, guilt, humiliation, embarrassment, feelings of pity towards the offender. Somebody saying, oh, that person is a good member of the community, they're a member of the temple or the church or this association, so they can't do that to anyone. There are problems of physical access to police stations or social workers, which need to be overcome. Retaliation or intimidation by the offender, their family or their friends. Lack of confidence with the legal process. Rudeness or poor treatment by the police or the authorities. There's the fear of having to relive the trauma in court and during the investigation, and this is something that you constantly have to do. And I've had to do it numerous times in getting a new therapist. Every time I have moved or a therapist has, I've reached a dead end with the therapist, is reliving the trauma every single time. There's also fear of the power and authority of the abuser, especially if the abuser is really high in the community. And I know I can't speak of this person's experience because I'm close to them, but Reverend June, who was part of the total shutdown, is currently struggling to get her case noticed by the Anglican Church because the man who raped her is a senior member of the Anglican Church. So she's constantly fighting against this person having such a high position and him being believed over her. So there's also fear of economic loss of economic support by the abuser, or loss of economic support from other people who side with the abuser. Preference of cultural means of resolving disputes, such as payment of damages, that can deter somebody from reporting. Fear of ridicule, and wanting to avoid the stigma, wanting to not be known as being damaged. And there's also fear of upsetting the stability of the family. We need to eliminate all those fears. And as a society, and I know that in the Indian community, it is such taboo to speak about sexual violence. I mean, as Ness was saying, oftentimes we don't even talk about the birds and the bees. I mean, we still refer to it as the birds and the bees. We don't have the sex talk with our kids. And I mean, I had the talk from an older cousin, and this is the fault of an entire community wanting to preserve a sort of imagined sanctity of sexual behavior, or a sort of this is taboo because it has been taboo for all of this time. Whatever reason we want to preserve those kinds of sensibilities, it is doing harm to our society. And when we are not open about these conversations, we are doing a disservice to survivors. We are doing a disservice to victims. And I can see Christy nodding there. We are doing such a disservice to ourselves as well, because not being an open society means that we are not protecting our people. We are not protecting our most vulnerable. And when we are open about these kind of things, we can begin to talk about them. And not only can we talk about them, we can help people. The issue of the 12-year-old being abducted a couple of weeks ago by her neighbor. The talk that was going on, and this makes me so angry, the talk that was going on social media about her parents having to have a better hold on her so that she didn't run away with the neighbor. No, she was 12 years old. She was abducted. It wasn't that she ran away with her neighbor. It wasn't her fault at all. She was a child. She should have been protected, not blamed. And people like Mashanthan, God help me, what if I ever meet this man? Um, People like him saying things about a survivor coming forward and then ridiculing them in videos on social media. It is despicable because we are constantly blaming survivors. We are constantly blaming victims for what they get themselves into. And at the end of the day, the person who is to blame for rape is the rapist, nobody else. And people will try to gaslight you into believing that, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. It is utter nonsense. And one of the reasons I get so angry about it is because we constantly perpetuate that kind of thinking. We constantly reassure abusers and perpetrators that they are safe within our community, while their survivors and their victims are not. And this needs to end. Okay.
Thank you, Nikki. That was a lot of information, but so well said. You illustrated it with such grace and with so much insight. I had every faith that you would, but you even exceeded my expectations. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for sharing your own personal experience with us. I know that is never an easy thing, but it is one of the many reasons why I personally, and I know many others, admire you greatly.
Thank you. I know I went a little bit over time there.
It's okay. I think that we can all bear with you, and it's fine. You also had some of Mayuri's time. So without well, there's no need to elaborate on anything that Nikita has said. I think that she has covered her topic extremely well. And if there are any questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. I am going to do another trigger warning before I hand over to Romita. The content that we are discussing this evening is very triggering. We are speaking about sexual violence, abuse, and if you do feel uncomfortable, please feel free. We will not be offended if you log off or if you mute it yourself. Um, Sly in the chat is saying, thank you for your openness, Nikita. You are strength personified. I agree 100%. You are strength and compassion personified.
Thank you, Sly. Thank you.
And, one of the very important points that Nikita spoke about is about how the reporting system, not just reporting to the authorities, but even reporting within our own family, um, leads to re-victimization because of the stigma associated with it. And this is one of the things that I want to say very emphatically, and I've said it in many instances before, is that even if a woman is sitting spread eagle naked on a bar, nobody has the right to touch her. Any sort of interaction, sexual interaction without consent is rape, whether it is your boyfriend, whether it is your husband. Um, there is no such thing as non-consensual sex. That is rape. And it is extremely sad that there are so many people who don't understand that, who don't, not only the perpetrators but even victims, people who I actually spoke to somebody recently who said that their husband demands sex every night, and I said, well, what do you do? What does he do if you don't disagree and you say that you don't want to? And she said that he continues to like shout and wake up the children and accuse me of having an affair. And it is absolutely sad that people feel that this is their obligation. And hopefully, we can spread the word that there is no such thing as non consensual sex, and that even within the realm of a relationship or even in a marriage, rape can and does still occur. And it is up to us to speak out and break that silence, and to create safe spaces where people are able to come forward and share with us so that we can use the tools that Nikita has given us to have that safe space for them and to help them through in whichever way they choose to deal with it. So, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Romita, and she will be speaking about the reporting element from a human trafficking standpoint. So, Romy, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ness, and good evening to everybody that's attended. Thank you so much. Before I go to the reporting part of human trafficking, I just like to outline a few effects of human trafficking. Nikki covered it very well with regards to the sexual violence aspect, but with regards to human trafficking, I just want to educate our gathering. Besides the physical element, women who are sexually exploited, they suffer similar injuries as those who are battered, from a sexual violence standpoint. So the difference between the two is that those who are sexually trafficked are subject to the same constant injuries due to continuous prostitution, for example, another form of sexual violence. So I've just got a few physical elements here that I can just share with you of trafficking victims: broken bones, traumatic brain injury, dizziness, headaches, and let's go on to some emotional effects. It's much the same, very similar to what Nikki was saying with sexual violence. Isolation takes place where being alone can have serious consequences on a person's mental state. They feel like no one cares about them because of the extent of their traffickers' exploitation. They feel unwanted. They feel cheap because obviously they are being bought and sold daily, um, and they are usually left alone to work. So they don't have real connections with people. Their only interaction would be with their fellow victims or their fellow prostitutes, for example. And then you get trust issues where, in some situations, people who are trafficked usually have trust issues to either their family, the person that has trafficked them. And I think it's very important to note that human trafficking doesn't occur just a stranger coming and kidnapping you off the street. You can be trafficked by your parent, unfortunately. You can be trafficked by your uncle, by your neighbor, your friend. So trust is very, very heightened, in terms of, they don't trust people. And basically anybody that they come into contact with, remember the experience is very violent. Um, so whatever they experience at work, they would take with them for the rest of the time. Um, and of course, family trust is also an issue because, for example, if a young girl was sent away by her family and she returns, she will not trust her family again, because if they had found out that she was a prostitute, they would never look at her the same way again. So guilt and shame, in most occasions, victims of human trafficking, they feel responsible for the situation, even though they're not. They blame themselves for the circumstances. It's very common. For example, a child who was sexually exploited may not try to break free from the situation because they feel so ashamed and because they feel so guilty about what happened. And many people, after they have left their situation, they really seek help because of the current mental state that they're in. They feel helpless. They've given up on life. Some commit suicide. So post-traumatic stress as well, it's very common amongst human trafficking victims. They suffer, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks from their situations. It leaves them in constant fear of, what might happen next. Is that person, if I return to my community, I cannot trust anybody because I'm always scared whether somebody's gonna, kidnap me or take advantage of me. So yeah, those are just some of the mental elements, and obviously I've explained the physical aspects of what a human trafficking victim goes through. In terms of recognizing signs, of a trafficked victim. So, for example, basically, let me just tell you before I even carry on: Durban, Johannesburg, Bloemfontein, Cape Town. That's the 4 major trafficking hubs in South Africa. So this is where you would find the most instances of human trafficking. So here are some of the signs that would be exhibited by a trafficking victim. They would appear malnourished. They would have, as I said, signs of physical abuse. They probably won't have an ID document or a passport because the trafficker would take it away. Their responses to a question, for example, if you ask them a series of questions or even 2 questions, it might appear, it might sound rehearsed or scripted, because that's exactly what the trafficker has told them. If someone asks you this is the way you need to respond. And if you go and ask another victim or another suspected victim and they tell you the exact same thing, then you know something's wrong. Checking into hotels or motels or cheap accommodation frequently, that's also another sign of something not being right. This is very common. Usually trafficking victims and prostitutes, they refer to their clients as daddy. That's one of the signs. And they might also have tattoos or branding at the back of their necks or their lower back. That's where usually traffickers brand their victims with a logo or an initial, just to kind of remind them that they are owned by the trafficker, which is quite scary as well. They're usually living at the place of employment. They appear destitute. They don't have much possessions. And then in terms of labor trafficking, where small kids are living or serving in a restaurant environment. So if you see that there's a person that looks quite young to be serving in a restaurant establishment and doesn't look very happy to be working there, then something is off, and you should probably ask a question or take it forward, or slip them your number just to try and help. A trafficking victim would also not be allowed to be going anywhere alone. And also another huge thing is when you think about brothels, they usually have darkened windows. Their windows are covered with cardboard. They have excessive security. So, excuse me, those are just some of the signs, recognizing signs of trafficked victims. And then in terms of the tools, what we can do to assist, it's very important. The first thing I would say is all of these signs, you must recognize them and know them. If you follow my campaigns on social media, I've got tons of information in terms of what's happening and how to recognize signs. You guys can go there and then you can learn of those signs and share it. So knowing the signs would be the first tool to help prevent trafficking. And then spread the word. Obviously, the power of education. The more you speak about it, the more people you reach, and the more people they tell, and the more aware your community around you is. Yeah, and then I would say also volunteering locally with your shelter, approaching institutions and organizations, for example, like the National Freedom Network, A21 South Africa. Those are major trafficking organizations, anti-trafficking, organizations in South Africa. They would be able to assist you and give you all of the information that you need. And obviously, stay informed about the topic. Regularly update yourself about how to go about helping somebody if you're interested in assisting victims, or if you just want to give a few hours of your time as community service. You can also approach companies, because most companies have a corporate social responsibility aspect where they're willing to assist. So you can put forward your organization, or you can put forward, you can recommend organizations that need the help, because most trafficking organizations always struggle with funding. So that would be another thing. Yeah, and then just raising your voice. That's very important, because, as I said before, as activists in whichever field you're in, you are giving a voice. You are raising your voice for the voiceless. So I think that's very important. So just keep speaking about it, and keep educating people, and keep telling your friends, and share whatever you see on social media. Um, Educate yourself. With regards to reporting, I don't know if you'll be able to assist, Nilesthra, but I think it's much the same, from what Nikki has said. The only thing is, from my experience and speaking to people that have attempted to report human trafficking, it's usually swept under kidnapping or abduction. So that's another challenge, because law enforcement is very, very, I would say, backward with regards to how they treat trafficking victims, and how they differentiate between human trafficking, abduction, sexual violence. And I think the most important thing that they should be doing is more training. I know that NPA, National Prosecuting Authority, does provide training on human trafficking, which is much appreciated. And then they've established task teams in all provinces. So there's a human trafficking task team in every province in South Africa. And yeah, I would say the national human trafficking hotline is 0800 222 777. So that's the point of contact that you would call, to report anything, even if it's just a suspicion. You don't even have to confirm that this person's being trafficked. If you see something that's not right, if you see something, say something. And then I would also, advise police station and guidance counselor or social worker. But I think the best thing to do would start with the human trafficking hotline, because they have the resources and they have the knowledge to refer you to the relevant authority. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank, thank you very much, Romy. Romy wasn't feeling very well this week. She actually has been diagnosed with some sort of condition that I cannot pronounce, but it affects her breathing. And the fact that she still managed to come on this evening and give us her wisdom and share her insight on a subject that she is so passionate about, we really appreciate it, Romy. Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes, 2 more minutes before we log off, as we did only start at 8:33. I did ask my best friend Yashika, who's actually a medical doctor, just to do a little bit of research for us into just the rape kit and the reporting from a medical perspective. So, Yash, if you don't mind, very quickly, just any insight that you may be
Hi,
able to.
Ness. Hi. Hi. Thank you so much. I think that Nikita covered it actually very well when she went through her procedure, and I think everything that she said was perfect. I think just from a medical perspective, I think it's very important to voice your opinion on who you want to examine you, and you as the main person, the victim, needs to be as comfortable as possible. So I think that's most important. And then the last few things I think we should add is that you should definitely have access to antiretroviral treatment, to STD prophylaxis, to unwanted pregnancy prophylaxis, and then also blood tests to be drawn for possible date rape. So those are just from a pure medical perspective, but everything else was covered very wonderfully by Nikita. Well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yash.
Just one more thing, Ness, that I actually had in my notes and I forgot to mention. If as a family or a friend, somebody comes to you and they are below the age of 18, it is your responsibility to report it to the police, regardless of whether they want to or not. So any minor, as long as they are not of the age of consent, it is your responsibility to report it. Yeah.
And then there was one more thing that I found on my research is that was a very nice app by an NGO called tia.co.za, where if you put in the code of *134*73555#, I'll put it into the chat box. It will actually bring up your designated centers that are closest to your location. So that's for somebody who is looking for a center to go to. And it's a free service that's available.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yashka. Thank you very much, Nikita. Thank you, Romy. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time out on a Monday evening, so close to the festive season, to have such a hard discussion. I think that the ladies here this evening handled this topic with the most grace, and it was, some of it was very difficult to hear, but very important for us to hear and very important for us to engage with. And it is my hope that we can continue this discussion to empower ourselves through education so that we can go out into our social circles, into our family units, into our workplaces, and we can continue speaking about these hard topics. The more that we speak about them, the more that we break the stigma associated with rape and sexual violence, the more that we let society know that it's never okay to blame the victim, that no matter however she's dressed, it does not mean yes, and that there is under no circumstances where we should be joking about rape or we should be blaming the victim or saying that she asked for it or making any excuses for sexual offenders. So, just in closing, before we end, I would please like to ask everybody to just drop their email address into the chat box so that we can keep in touch and we can share the recording. I know that our previous webinar, Nikita managed to convert it to a podcast and she did share it on Facebook. So thank you very much, Nikita. I'm very technologically challenged, but your help is invaluable. So please do share your email addresses and we will keep in touch and inform you about our upcoming webinars. Thank you to each and every one of you once again. And yeah, just the last statement that I'd like to make is that Section 12.2 of our Constitution, of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, guarantees our right to bodily integrity. That means that when anybody violates our right to bodily integrity, it is a criminal act, it's unconstitutional, and it should not be allowed, not only from an ethical standpoint, but from a legal standpoint. Every woman, every person is entitled to the integrity of their body, and there is no shame, there is no there shouldn't be any ill feelings to anybody who has suffered at the hands of a perpetrator in any instance of sexual violence. I hope that whomever, if there is anyone here that has unfortunately been, is a survivor, that you feel supported by this conversation and that you would also, if you feel so comfortable, to share your insights with us, and to anyone else who has any insight or anything that they would like to discuss in relation to this topic, please do engage with us. We'd love to hear from you. We want to keep the conversation going and we want to continue to empower you and empower each other and us through education. So once again, thank you very much and good night.
Good night.
Good night. Please don't leave without giving us your email address. Thank you. Ayanda, I'm so happy to see you here. Hi, team. You muted, Ayanda. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay.